My mother spent 33 years telling everyone I didn't have a real job. She said it at Thanksgiving. She said it at Easter. She said it to 50 guests at my sister's birthday party while I stood 3 feet behind her, holding a tray of food I'd cooked with my own 2 hands. What she didn't know was that I'd just found a note in her junk drawer. A note that proved she'd stolen the one thing I wanted most in this world, and lied to my face about it for 18 months. So when my sister called me 3 weeks later, sobbing, telling me our mother was on her knees in the living room, I didn't feel guilty. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. Welcome back to Real Family Voices. I'm Andrea, 33, a CPA who traded a corner office for a home office and a client list I built from nothing. My family called that unemployment. This is the story of a birthday party. 50 guests, 2 days of cooking, and one folded piece of paper that brought my mother's entire world crashing down. Not with a scream, not with a scene, but with something far quieter and far more devastating. The truth. Drop a comment below if you've ever been the invisible one in your family, the one who does everything and gets thanked for nothing. And if this story hits close to home, subscribe. Because by the end, you're going to understand exactly why the quiet ones are the most dangerous people in the room. Let me take you back to where it started. 18 months ago, I quit my job at a Morristown accounting firm. 7 years of 6 a.m. alarms, tax season migraines, and client dinners where I smiled until my face physically hurt. I didn't have a breakdown. I didn't storm out. I just woke up one morning and realized I was pouring my entire life into building someone else's dream, when I had the skills to build my own. So I did. My new office was a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. Small. The radiator clanked. You could hear the spin cycle through the floor. But the desk by the window, that was mine. For the first time in my life, I was building something that had my name on it. That Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed between client spreadsheets. My sister, Megan. Andrea, Mom said you'll help with my party this weekend. 50 people. You're free, right? You're free. I held the phone away from my ear for a second. Not from surprise. This was how my family had always worked. My mother volunteered me the way people donate old furniture. Casually. Assuming no one had a better use for it. But here's the thing you need to understand about Megan. Before she was my sister, she was my best friend. We shared a bedroom until I was 12. She held my hand at our grandmother's funeral. She was turning 37, and some stubborn, hopeful part of me still wanted to give her something beautiful. I'll cook, I said. But I need help with the setup and cleanup. The tables, the chairs, decorations. I can't do all of it alone. Sure, Megan said breezily. We'll all pitch in. I believed her. God help me, I always believed her. And looking back, that was the same trap I'd been walking into since I was old enough to hold a dish towel. I drove to my parents' house Friday afternoon, 25 minutes down Route 17, past the Wendy's where I'd had my first job at 16. The beige ranch on Maple Lane hadn't changed in 30 years. Same flag out front. Same lawn my father mowed every Saturday like it was a religious obligation. I walked in carrying my laptop bag and a canvas tote of professional knives, my own. Dad raised one hand from his recliner, without looking up from the TV. Hey kid. That was my father's full emotional range before dinner. Mom was on the phone in the dining room, using that voice. The warm, honeyed, church committee voice she saved exclusively for people who weren't her family. Oh, the fundraiser numbers look wonderful, Pastor. Yes, I've been managing the books myself. Everything's right on track for the annual review. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. I'd been managing those books for 3 years. Every receipt, every reconciliation, every quarterly report, all of it filed under Helen Foster, campaign chair. Because my mother's name was on the letterhead. And mine wasn't. She hung up, turned, and saw me standing in the kitchen doorway. No hello. No thank you for driving out here. Good. You're here. She pointed a manicured finger at a legal pad on the counter. Grocery list. Start tonight, so tomorrow you can focus on the main dishes. I picked it up. 3 pages. Handwritten. Appetizers for 50. 3 entrees. 2 salads. Rolls from scratch. A 3-tier birthday cake. I stared at that list, and the truth landed in my stomach like a stone. This wasn't helping with a party. This was full-service catering. Unpaid, unacknowledged, and already assigned to me before I'd even walked through the door. I started at 7 that evening and didn't stop until midnight. 9 pounds of chicken thighs, marinated in 2 batches of my grandmother's herb rub. 2 enormous bowls of pasta salad. 3 dozen dinner rolls, mixed, risen, punched down, shaped, and set on trays for the morning's second rise. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and yeast and pure effort. My forearms burned. Flour dusted the apron I'd tied on 5 hours earlier, and wouldn't take off for 3 days. Around 9, Dad wandered in. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching me knead dough. Need a hand? And something in my chest lifted. Just a little. Yes, I said. Can you chop the onions for the coleslaw? He nodded and reached for the knife block. He actually reached for it. And then from the living room. Ray? Come see this. They're showing the church renovation on the 11 o'clock preview. Dad's hand froze in midair. He looked at me. He mouthed the word sorry. And he walked out. I stood there alone in that kitchen, and chopped the onions myself. The tears came halfway through, and I let them fall. And for years afterward I let everyone believe it was just the onions. But it wasn't the onions. It was the fact that even when someone in my family wanted to help me, my own mother could call them away with a single word, and they would go. Every time. At midnight, I washed every pot, wiped every counter, swept the floor. Then I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, where my track trophies still lined the shelf. And there, on the top shelf, sat my framed CPA certificate. I'd brought it home 2 Christmases ago so my mother could see it. Proof of the hardest exam I ever passed. The night I cried in my car in the parking lot because I'd finally done it. It sat next to a participation ribbon from a church bake sale, under a layer of dust so thick I could have written my name in it. She'd never moved it. She'd never even cleaned it. I pulled my childhood quilt over my shoulders, set my alarm for 5, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally took me. 5 a.m. came like a slap. By 9, I had 4 dishes running at once, timers staggered on my phone like a flight controller managing departures. A skill I'd learned plating 200 covers a night to pay for my exam prep. Megan and Derek pulled up at 10. Through the window, I watched my sister climb out carrying a bottle of wine and a gift bag. Derek carried nothing. Megan hugged me, one careful arm, keeping her clothes away from my flour-streaked apron. It smells incredible in here. You're so talented at this, Andrea. Thanks. Can you set up the folding tables in the yard? Mom rented 6. They're in the garage. She tilted her head, smiling. Let me shower first. Long drive. Derek was already drifting toward the living room. I'll just go say hi to your dad. Neither of them came back. So I set up 6 folding tables and 50 chairs by myself, carrying them 2 at a time across the yard. Then back inside to flip the pork, check the rolls, start the slaw. By noon, I found Megan on the couch. Shoes off, legs tucked under her, scrolling her phone. Meg, I really need help bringing out the chairs. She didn't look up. Mom said you had it covered. I stood there for a long moment, looking at my best friend, my sister, who couldn't be bothered to set down her phone on her own birthday. Then I turned around and went back outside. And I finished. Alone. At 2 o'clock, with the party still 6 hours away, I found my mother in the dining room, arranging carnations in mason jars. The one single task she'd assigned to herself all weekend. She was humming a hymn. Mom. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I've been cooking and setting up since 5 this morning. I need Megan and Derek to take over the dessert prep. She didn't look up from her flowers. Megan has a stressful job, honey. She needs to relax this weekend. I have a job too, Mom. And that made her look up. She gave me the smile. The thin one. The one she'd been giving me since the day I announced I was going out on my own. It wasn't hostile. It was so much worse than hostile. It was pity. The patient, indulgent expression you'd give a child who tells you they want to be an astronaut. You're the only one without a real job. She said it the way you'd say water is wet. Factual. Obvious. Barely worth the breath it took. Then she went back to her carnations. Humming. I walked to the kitchen sink and gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white. I'd heard versions of this for years. The pointed comments at Thanksgiving about my little experiment. The careful questions at Easter about when I'd go back to a real office. But never this plainly. Never used as the reason, the logical, settled explanation for why I, specifically, should stand in a hot kitchen for 2 days while everyone else sat in air conditioning. And the part that truly broke something in me? She wasn't being cruel. She believed it. In my mother's world, it was simply a fact. Megan had a real job. So Megan deserved rest. Andrea did not, so Andrea did not. I picked up the knife. And I went back to chopping. Saturday night, the cooking finally done. I opened my laptop to the one place that never made me feel small. The numbers. The church's capital campaign ledger. 3 years of transactions I'd entered and reconciled myself. Numbers don't have opinions about your career. Numbers don't pity you. But as I scrolled through the entries Mom had made herself, the ones she'd entered when I was busy, something caught my accountant's eye. Miscellaneous event supplies. $380. No receipt. I filtered the data. 14 entries. Vague categories. Round numbers. Every single one reimbursed to H. Foster. Total. Roughly $2,200. Now, I want to be clear. This wasn't theft. My mother genuinely spent that money. Flowers, flyers, postage. She spent it from her own pocket and paid herself back, which is completely normal. But she never kept a single receipt. She rounded everything up. She used categories so vague they'd collapse the second anyone looked closely. And someone was about to look closely. An auditor who didn't know her. Who'd open this file and see 14 unexplained payments to the woman in charge, and start asking questions. Questions my mother couldn't answer. Because she'd never learned how. I'd always answered them for her. For 3 years. Right on cue my phone buzzed. Gerald Whitman, the church's elder treasurer, a retired bank manager, the kind of man who double-checks his own grocery receipts. Diane mentioned the books are all in order for the review. Audit committee meets in 2 weeks. Diane speaks very highly of your help. Help. I read that word 3 times. 3 years. 14 quarterly reports. A complete audit defense. And I was the help. I stepped onto the back porch with my phone and called my friend Lena. She runs a flower shop, one of my first clients, and the closest thing I had to a sister who actually saw me. You're catering a 50-person party. For free, she said flatly. Do you know what you'd charge a stranger for this? I did know. I'd quoted almost this exact event for a nonprofit gala the month before. And let me guess, Lena said. Megan hasn't peeled a single potato, has she? The silence from my end answered for me. Andrea, listen to me. Tomorrow, at that party, stand up in front of everyone. Tell all 50 guests exactly how many hours you've worked. Every dish. Every chair. Let them hear it. I'm not doing that. Why not? You've earned it. Because that's what she would do. The words were out before I could think. But they were true. My mother was a master of the public audience. Of making someone defend themselves in front of a crowd while she stood there calm and wounded and righteous. If I give a speech about my own suffering, I'm using her playbook. And I'll lose. She'll cry. And the whole room will rush to comfort her, not me. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then promise me one thing. If she says something awful tomorrow, you don't argue. You don't give a speech. You just walk. I watched a moth circle the porch light, beating itself stupid against the glass. I'll think about it. I told myself it would be fine. One more day. Smile. Serve the food. Go home. But something had already shifted inside me. And it was about to shift a whole lot more. Sunday. Party day. Up at 5 again. The 3rd morning in a row on 4 hours of sleep. The face staring back at me from the dark kitchen window looked 10 years older. Dark circles. Unwashed hair. The same apron from Friday, stained now beyond saving. By 8, I'd piped delicate frosting roses around the base of that 3-tier cake. Each petal a deliberate turn of the wrist. I'd taught myself from YouTube during those first jobless months, filling the silent hours between sending out proposals that nobody answered. Mom came downstairs. She walked over, leaned in, and squinted at the cake. The roses are a little uneven on this side. Then she poured herself coffee and went out to the porch. No good morning. No, that's beautiful. No, thank you for the 18 hours you've spent in my kitchen. And here's the thing I'm not proud of. I adjusted the roses. They weren't uneven. I'd checked them twice. But I adjusted them anyway. Because some desperate, 8-year-old part of me still believed that if I got the roses right, if I got everything right, she might finally look at what I'd built and say the words I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. I'm proud of you. She never said them. Not that morning. Not ever. But God, I piped those roses like she might. The guests began arriving at noon. Neighbors. Megan's co-workers. Church friends I'd cooked Sunday dinners for over the years. My mother stood at the front door like the hostess of a 5-star restaurant. Welcome. Kumain. Kumain. We've been cooking all weekend. I heard it through the steam rising off the chili pot. Mrs. Aldridge, 78, sharp as a tax audit, looked around at the spread. Helen, this is incredible. You did all this. My mother waved a modest hand. Oh, you know me. I just can't sit still. I was standing 3 feet behind her, holding a tray of pulled pork sliders, sweat beading on my upper lip. And Mrs. Aldridge's eyes shifted, just slightly, over my mother's shoulder and landed on me. She held my gaze for one full beat. The look one woman gives another when she sees exactly what's happening and can't say it out loud. Then she took a slider, gave me the smallest nod, and moved on. I retreated to the kitchen. And through that window, I watched the whole thing unfold like a movie I wasn't allowed to be in. Megan opening gifts in a circle of laughing friends. Derek pouring drinks. My father telling his Ford plant story in a lawn chair. 50 people eating food I'd cooked, sitting in chairs I'd carried, under tablecloths I'd ironed. And not one single person came back to that kitchen. Not one asked if I needed water, or a break, or a chair of my own. The dishwasher was already on its second cycle. The party was 1 hour old. I wiped the counter for the 3rd time. And the truth finally formed clean in my head. It's not the work I resent. It's the disappearing. During a lull, I tried one last time. I caught my mother in the hallway. Party noise bleeding through the door behind her. Mom, the church books. There's about $2,200 in expenses with no receipts. The audit is in 2 weeks. I need you to find them. Or write a memo for each one. She didn't even stop walking. Not now, Andrea. We have guests. This isn't optional. If the committee sees entries with no documentation. I handled it. The words came down like a slap. She stopped, turned, and gave me the look she used when I was 13 and asked too many questions. Shut it down. Final. No appeal. You didn't handle it, I said, matching her volume. I handle it. Every single year. And every year you take the numbers I prepare and present them to that committee like you sat down and did the work yourself. Her face hardened. Not embarrassment. Something colder. The cornered look of a woman whose authority has been questioned in her own house. Lower. Your voice. This is Megan's day. And she walked back to the party. I stood alone in that hallway, and I made peace with one thing. I tried. That mattered. Because later, when the weight of everything came down, I needed to know I'd given her the chance. And she'd chosen the carnations. An hour later, the moment came that changed everything. I needed serving spoons. My grandmother's good silver ones, buried in the deep junk drawer my mother always meant to clean and never did. I pulled it open and started digging. Expired pizza coupons. Dead batteries. A rubber band ball. A birthday card Megan had sent 3 years ago, still sealed, never opened. And then my fingers brushed something. A small notepad page. Torn at the top. Folded once. My mother's handwriting. I unfolded it. Richard Brennan called. Partner position available for Andrea. Told him Andrea decided to step back from accounting. January 14, 2025. I read it. I read it again. And then a 3rd time, slowly, the way you read a medical diagnosis, because the words refused to settle into meaning. January 14. 18 months ago. Richard Brennan was the founding partner of my old firm. My mentor. The man who signed my CPA recommendation letter. He had called my parents' house, the old landline still listed in my file from when I'd switched phone carriers that very month, to offer me a partnership. And my mother answered. And she told him I wasn't interested. Without asking me. Without ever telling me he'd called. Suddenly I understood that strange, cool phone call I'd had with Richard the following July. I thought you'd moved on from accounting, Andrea. Your mother mentioned you'd decided to pursue other things. It had lasted under 3 minutes. I'd never understood his distance. Now I held the explanation in my trembling hand. A partner position. The corner office overlooking the Morristown Green. A 6-figure salary. A future I never even knew was offered to me. Erased by a woman who picked up a phone that wasn't hers and spoke for a daughter she never bothered to ask. I folded the note, slid it into my back pocket, and I whispered, to no one at all. Someone has to do it right. And then I did something that surprised even me. I served the cake. With steady hands I cut 50 slices. I carried trays into the yard while everyone sang happy birthday, and my sister blew out candles shaped like a 3 and a 7. Nobody saw the note in my pocket. Nobody saw the shift behind my eyes. I'd always been good at that, running the numbers in my head while my hands did something else entirely. Because I'd already done the math. If I confronted her now, pulled out the note, waved it in front of 50 people, she would cry. She was brilliant at crying on cue. Not faking it, exactly, but accelerating a real emotion into a spectacle that pulled the entire room's sympathy toward her. And they would side with her. They always side with the tears. No. I needed a different equation. One where the numbers did the talking. One where the audience wasn't mine to win, because the truth would win it for me. I pulled out my phone and texted Lena one line. You were right about everything. She wrote back, about what? I put the phone away. And I served seconds. The party ended around 8. Taillights faded down Maple Lane one by one. Megan hugged me last, squeezing tight. Best birthday ever. Thank you, Andrea. Seriously. And she meant it. That was the part that always broke my heart a little. Megan meant every single thank you she ever gave me. She just never once stopped to wonder why those thank yous were always pointed at me. And never at anyone else. Mom announced she was exhausted and went up to bed without a backward glance at the disaster of a kitchen. My father mumbled something and shuffled off behind her, and I started washing. 10 o'clock. 11. The hot water ran out and I switched to cold, my lower back screaming. Sometime after 11 I stepped away to the bathroom, and when I came back, the last of the dishes were done. The counter wiped. The slow cooker soaking. And there, propped on the drying rack against a clean plate, was a yellow sticky note. My father's shaky handwriting. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Dad. I held it for a very long time. 2 notes in one day. One from my mother, a record of sabotage hidden in a drawer. One from my father, an apology, left in secret while no one was watching. Both written when no one else could see. And both proving the exact same devastating thing. Everyone in that house knew exactly what they were doing to me. They just couldn't bear to do it out loud. The next morning, the church books sat open on my screen. And I faced the choice my whole life had been building toward. I could do what I'd done for 3 years. Add my notes. Cross-reference the dates. Quietly transform her sloppy bookkeeping into clean documentation. Protect her. Be the shield. Again. Or I could stop. Not sabotage. Not delete a single number. Not alter one entry. Just stop supplementing. Remove my own unpaid professional work and leave the raw ledger exactly as my mother had created it. Vague. Undocumented. Unexplained. And if the committee reviewed that, they would have questions. Questions she could not answer. Because I would no longer be standing behind her, whispering the answers. I wasn't going to destroy my mother. I was simply going to stop being the thing that stood between her and the truth. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and started packing my bag. On my way out, before I could escape, I stopped at Mrs. Aldridge's house to return her leftover containers, because my mother had volunteered me for that too, of course, knowing I'd never leave a 78-year-old neighbor hanging. Mrs. Aldridge set the containers down without even looking at them. She hadn't actually needed them back. She poured me a cup of coffee instead. Sit down. You look like you've been running someone else's marathon. I said. And for the first time in 3 days, I wasn't standing. You did all that cooking yourself, didn't you? It wasn't a question. Honey, I've known your mother 30 years. Helen Foster doesn't cook. She orchestrates. I watched you through that kitchen window. Alone. The entire party. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, and my eyes started to sting. I was a bookkeeper for 40 years, she said gently, topping off my coffee. County clerk, then private practice. You know what I learned in all that time? I shook my head. The person doing the numbers is invisible, right up until the moment the numbers go wrong. And then suddenly, everyone remembers they exist. Those words landed somewhere deep, in the same place where the ledger and Richard Brennan's phone call, and that folded note all sat, circling a truth I hadn't quite named yet. She reached over and patted my hand. Don't let them make you invisible, dear. You are worth so much more than that. I drove home with the windows down. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was something far more powerful. I was clear. The first thing I did when I got home was call Richard Brennan. He picked up on the second ring. Andrea. Been a while. Richard, I have to ask you something. In January of last year, did you call my parents' house about a position? A pause. The careful kind, where someone is choosing their words. I did. Partner track. We'd been impressed with your client retention. Your mother answered. She said you'd decided to step away from accounting. Another beat. I respected what I thought was your choice. I never pressed. My voice came out very quiet. I never got that message, Richard. My mother never told me he called. The silence on the line stretched long. I could hear him recalibrating. The same way I do when a client's numbers suddenly tell a completely different story than the one I've been told. Andrea. I don't know what to say. The position was filled in March. I understand. I kept my voice level. Pure professional CPA mode. Is anything available now? Not partner track. But I have a senior consultant opening. Solid salary, full benefits, real trajectory. And Andrea, given what you've just told me, I'd very much like to meet this week. I'll be there. I hung up and sat in my little apartment as the afternoon sun warmed my desk. And for the first time in 18 months, the hallway I thought had dead-ended at a wall had a door. Not the same door. Not the corner office. But a door. And it was open. And I had opened it. Myself. The following Sunday, I went to family dinner. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to watch the machine work, now that I finally understood how it was built. I brought a store-bought pie. Grocery label still stuck to the box. My mother's eyebrows rose, but for once she said nothing. We sat down. Potruast. The conversation wandered. And then Derek, reaching for the bread, turned to me. Andrea, how's the freelance business going? Megan said you've been picking up more clients. Before I could open my mouth, my mother slid in. Smooth. Practiced. The verbal equivalent of stepping in front of someone. Andrea's still figuring things out. A delicate sip of wine. And then to Derek, with that same flat certainty. She's the only one without a real job, you know. But she keeps busy. The table went silent. Derek studied his plate. Megan stared into her wine glass. My father looked at the wall behind my head, his jaw working around words that would never come. And I set my fork down. Carefully. The way you set down something fragile when you've decided not to break it. You're just going to leave it behind. I need to get going. Thank you for dinner. I stood. My mother blinked, more annoyed than worried. You just got here. I walked to the front door. And I closed it behind me. Not a slam. A click. A latch settling into place. For the very last time. In the driveway, engine off, I made 2 phone calls. First Lena. She said it again. In front of Derek. Lena exhaled. Are you going to tell them about the note? About Richard? No. Then what are you going to do? I watched a moth bump against the porch light. I'm going to stop doing the job she keeps telling everyone I don't have. Then I dialed Gerald Whitman. Gerald, it's Andrea Foster. I'm sorry to call on a Sunday, but I need to let you know. Effective today, I'm stepping down from managing the church campaign books. And I need to flag something for the audit committee. There's roughly $2,200 in expenses across 3 years with no receipts and no documentation. I've been supplementing those records with my own research notes. When I hand over the raw files, those notes won't be there. A long pause. Removing them means the explanations will be gone. The raw ledger will reflect exactly what was entered by the campaign chair. You'll want the committee to review it before the annual meeting. I could practically hear his banker's brain processing the implications. Andrea, I appreciate your transparency. Perhaps I should discuss this with Helen directly. She is the chair. You should, I said. And I started the car. Lena came over that evening with wine I hadn't asked for and opinions I hadn't requested. We sat on my tiny balcony. You have the note, she said. You could walk into next Sunday's dinner and lay it all out. Read it to Megan. Let her see exactly who your mother is. I held my glass without drinking. I've thought about it. And it's exactly what she would do. Put someone on trial in front of an audience, with no warning, and force them to defend themselves in real time. She spent 30 years perfecting that move. I set the glass down. If I stand in that dining room waving a crumpled note, I become her. Different target. Same weapon. And I don't deserve to become that. Then what was the point of calling Gerald? Gerald's job, his literal elected responsibility, is to review the books. I gave him accurate information, and I removed my unpaid labor from the equation. That's all. If the numbers she entered can stand on their own, she'll be completely fine. And if they can't, I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. That's not revenge. It's math. Lena stared at me over her wine. You are absolutely terrifying. I'm an accountant, I said. Same thing. Tuesday evening, Megan called. Her voice had that careful quality people use when they're trying to ask questions without admitting how much they already suspect. Something's going on with Mom. A man from the church came by Gerald. She's been weird ever since. Snappy. And she said you sabotaged her. I resigned from a volunteer position, Megan. That's not sabotage. That's quitting. Andrea, this feels bigger than church accounting. And there it was. The first time in 37 years that Megan had ever pushed. The first time she sensed there was a floor beneath the floor. A whole story underneath the one she'd been told her entire life. Ask Mom about a note in the junk drawer, I said. January 14th, last year. Her handwriting. What note? Ask Mom. And I hung up. Not to be cruel, but because I was finally done doing other people's homework. For 33 years, I'd been the one who investigated and explained and translated everything for people who never bothered to understand until the bill came due. If Megan wanted the truth, she was going to have to open the drawer herself. She went to the house the next day. She told me the rest later, in pieces over lunch. The junk drawer was spotless. My mother had emptied it, wiped it down, lined it with fresh paper. Megan almost stopped right there, almost accepted the clean drawer as proof there was nothing to find. But she'd heard something in my voice. A flatness. A finality. And it wouldn't let her stop. She checked the recycling. The trash. And there, crumpled between a credit card statement and a department store flyer. She found it. Our mother's handwriting. Richard Brennan. Partner position. Told him she decided to step back. January 14th. Megan walked into the living room, where Mom sat watching a home renovation show. Mom, what is this? My mother's face went white, then a deep, furious red. The color of a carefully built wall the instant it's breached. Where did you find that? In the trash. You threw it away. The defense was instant. Reflexive. Muscle memory. She wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. She'd just left the firm. She needed time. You decided that for her. Without telling her. Megan's voice was shaking now. Is this why you keep calling her unemployed, Mom? Because you made sure she stayed that way. And my mother started to cry. Not quietly. The kind of crying that fills a room and demands that everyone stop and tend to the person crying. After everything I've done for this family. But for the first time in her entire life, my sister did not reach for the tissue box. She just stood there, holding the note. My mother called me 4 times that night. I watched each one light up my screen and let it ring through. She texted, "Call me right now." I read it, turned the phone face down, and went back to a client's quarterly filing. So she called Megan instead. "Tell your sister to pick up the phone." Megan told me about it later, with a kind of exhausted wonder, like she'd been handed a pair of glasses and could suddenly see the machinery she'd been living inside her whole life. "I told her to call you herself," Megan said, "and to explain the note while she was at it. Megan, she's blowing this out of proportion. It was one phone call. I was protecting her." Protecting her from what, Mom? A partnership? A real salary? She's been cooking your meals, doing your taxes, running your church books, and you sabotaged her career, and then stood in your own kitchen and called her unemployed. And my mother's final defense, the one she'd hidden behind for years. "The church books are fine. I handled it." But the tremor in her voice gave her away. Gerald's visit had cracked something open. The audit was coming. The notes were gone. And the daughter who'd quietly fixed everything for 3 years was no longer answering the phone. Thursday, Gerald sent an email. Professional. Measured. The tone of a man who'd spent 40 years delivering bad news in calibrated language. It was addressed to my mother, and copied to the pastor and 2 elders. Subject: Capital Campaign, Expedited Review. Given the discrepancies flagged by the outgoing bookkeeper, the audit was being moved up to Saturday. My mother called me at 7 the next morning. And this time I answered, because this was a professional matter, and I answer professional calls. Her voice was stripped raw. "You need to fix this. Put your notes back in the files. The audit is Saturday." "Those notes were my professional work, Mom. Work you told 50 people I don't do. This is different. This is the church. The raw ledger is accurate. If your expenses are legitimate, you'll have no trouble explaining them to Gerald and the committee. You know I can't explain them." Her voice cracked. "I don't have the receipts. You always." She stopped. She heard herself. The sentence she'd been about to finish was, "You always took care of it." In that single broken half-sentence, my mother had nearly admitted, out loud, to the daughter she called jobless, that my job was the only thing that had ever stood between her and the consequences of her own choices. "Yes," I said softly. "I always did." Silence. Just the sound of her ragged breathing. The sound of a woman realizing the shield she'd spent years mocking was the only thing between her and the arrow. "If you'd like to hire me as a professional bookkeeper to prepare your audit response," I said, "my rate is $75 an hour. That's what I charge my clients. The ones who give me real jobs." And I hung up. The way you close a ledger when the numbers are final. Saturday, I worked at my own desk. I'd decided not to attend the audit. This wasn't my performance. I had built the stage, placed the actors, and stepped quietly into the wings. What happened next belonged to the numbers. Gerald called that afternoon. The committee had reviewed the raw ledger. 14 flagged entries. No receipts. $2,200. They'd asked my mother to explain. She tried. I handled it. I've always handled the fundraiser. Gerald said she repeated that phrase over and over, each time with a little less conviction, until it stopped sounding like a defense at all, and started sounding like an echo bouncing off walls that simply weren't there anymore. They didn't accuse her of theft. They understood she'd likely spent her own money, but the documentation didn't exist. And trust, the one true currency of a church, was broken. They asked her to step down as campaign chair. The title, the authority, the front of the room position she'd built her entire post-retirement identity around. Gone. "Andrea," Gerald asked quietly, "did you know this would happen when you stepped away?" I gave him the honest answer. I knew that without me cleaning up the books would show exactly what they are. "And you still resigned." "Someone has to do it right, Gerald. And someone has to let the wrong things be seen." And then my phone lit up again. "Megan," I answered, and what came through the speaker was the sound I started this whole story with. The broken, hiccuping sobs. The sound of something shattering past fixing. Mom just came home from the church and Andrea, she's on her knees in the living room. She keeps saying I handled it. And Dad's just standing there. Gerald was here. She lost the fundraiser. What happened? I stopped handling it for her, Megan. That's what happened. But why? Why now? Why like this? Ask Mom what she told Richard Brennan when he called about a partnership for me. Ask her how she presented my numbers to that committee for 3 years, and then stood in her own kitchen and told 50 people I don't have a real job. Megan was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. And in the background my mother. Not the church committee voice. Not the polished hostess. Something raw and unfamiliar. The sound of a woman whose audience had finally seen what was behind the curtain. The note, Megan whispered. And then small and cracked and honest. Andrea, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. You're seeing it now, I said. And that was enough. My mother called that evening. I answered, because there was nothing left to protect. Not her reputation. Not my patience. Not the careful fiction that our family worked the way families are supposed to. Her voice was used up. Emptied out. Are you happy now? No, Mom. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy in a very long time. I was trying to protect you. You weren't ready. You were protecting yourself. I said it quietly. No accusation. No heat. Just the final line of an audit that had been running in my head for 18 months. If I succeeded on my own, it meant you could have too. And you couldn't live with that. She didn't deny it. And that silence, that hollow place where a defense should have been, told me more than any confession ever could. She couldn't argue with the math. I love you, Mom, I said. But I'm done being invisible so that you can feel visible. I hung up. I set the phone on my desk. And I looked at the evening light falling across my spreadsheets, my client folders, and the framed CPA certificate I'd taken down from her dusty shelf and hung on my own wall. The dust was gone. The glass was clean. My mother called that evening. I answered, because there was nothing left to protect. Not her reputation. Not my patience. Not the careful fiction that our family worked the way families are supposed to. Her voice was used up. Emptied out. Are you happy now? No, Mom. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy in a very long time. I was trying to protect you. You weren't ready. You were protecting yourself. I said it quietly. No accusation. No heat. Just the final line of an audit that had been running in my head for 18 months. If I succeeded on my own, it meant you could have too. And you couldn't live with that. She didn't deny it. And that silence, that hollow place where a defense should have been, told me more than any confession ever could. She couldn't argue with the math. I love you, Mom, I said. But I'm done being invisible so that you can feel visible. I hung up. I set the phone on my desk. And I looked at the evening light falling across my spreadsheets, my client folders, and the framed CPA certificate I'd taken down from her dusty shelf and hung on my own wall. The dust was gone. The glass was clean. 3 months later, I sat in a conference room at Brennan and Associates and signed my offer letter. Senior consultant. $82,000 a year. Benefits. A desk by the window, looking out over the Morristown Green. Close enough to watch the trees change color. Richard shook my hand. We should have tried harder to reach you, Andrea. That's on us too. I didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. It wasn't. But blame is a ledger I'd stopped keeping. My mother was removed as campaign chair. The church hired a part-time professional bookkeeper. The $2,200 was eventually reconciled. She produced what receipts she could and wrote personal checks for the rest. She wasn't banned. She still attends. But she comes in late now, and leaves quietly, and the congregation noticed the way congregations always do, with polite silence and averted eyes. My father called me twice in those 3 months. Short conversations. His sentences clipped and careful, like a man walking across a frozen lake. He never apologized again. But the second time he asked about my new position, and when I told him the salary he said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo." And his voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't enough. It would never undo 33 years of silence. But it was Ray Foster's version of everything he had. And Megan? Megan took me to lunch on neutral ground. She cried into her Caesar salad and said, "I never asked, because I always just assumed everything was fine. I'm not going to assume anymore." She started doing her own taxes that April. I used to think strength was staying, showing up at 5 in the morning, cooking for 50, smiling while someone called my entire life a hobby. I thought if I just worked hard enough, quietly enough, they would finally see me. But that's not strength. That's a transaction where you keep paying, and they never once check the bill. Real strength is knowing the exact cost of everything you give, and then choosing who actually deserves it. That's where Andrea's story ends. For now, a note in a junk drawer, a 3-tier cake nobody thanked her for, and one quiet decision that changed which foster woman her family, and her church, would ever trust again. If you've ever been the one doing the invisible work while somebody else took the bow, share this story. Leave a comment and tell me, would you have used the note? And subscribe to Real Family Voices. Because the quiet ones? We always have the best receipts.